Abraham is promised a great nation. Britannia is branded great. The former will be holy, my home nation is yet to be plumb-lined. Great in the casual use, that we can agree. A nation of nations with England as the foundation of Britain, fronted by imposing white cliffs up to the Jurassic coast, leaning over the channel that acts as a great moat from the continent. Famous for its rolling patchwork hills, the English countryside, untamed and genteel, is blessed with rain from above. Its ageless woodlands, commanding dales and winding country lanes weave a web of charming villages and market towns. Scotland covers 790 offshore islands, glistering lochs, topmost mountains and sunken glens of the highlands, fertile farmland of the lowlands, sea-cliff waterfall and fluorescent waves of the northern lights. Visiting a Welsh village or coastline, you could be anywhere in the world, with golden sands and ancient ruins the choicest holiday destination. Northern Ireland's famous dark hedges, granite-mown mountains and giant causeway cling to Britain from across the North Channel. From Britain's snow-topped mountains to paradise beaches, it is truly spectacular and inspiring, understandably a prize people have longed and longed to dwell in. Complementing the landscape, its Tudor homes, stately homes and palaces, and millennia-old cathedrals and castles, Windsor being the oldest and largest inhabited castle in the world, home of English kings and queens for almost 1,000 years. Britain has been a trusted voice in all quarters, the world's dependable authority in the British Broadcasting Corporation. World prestige second to none. The alluring tongue of the upper class, the appeal of British uniforms, the clout of British traditions and ceremony. No nation does fancy dress better, no nation does procession better, all of which has bred comparisons to Eden, Jerusalem, even uninvited labels of the seat of Mars and biblical Tarshish. We are a constitutional monarchy which follows a democratic system. The British royal family, with a historic 70-year reign of Queen Elizabeth II, is known the world over. The crown came to represent less about authority and more about continuity, respectability, and the family, values traditionally cherished by the working class. Dating back to the 1700s, our most prominent patriotic songs, including the national anthem, are somewhat prophetic, petitionary, and conceding of the sovereignty of God over our king and nation. 8 centuries have passed since the Magna Carta sought to prevent the monarch from exploiting his power. Britain is one of only a handful of nations to have an uncodified constitution. Aside from old colonies, the only other two being Saudi Arabia and Israel. The theoretical advantage being that the nation can adapt and pivot abruptly according to circumstance. Set apart in more ways than one, divine and diligent preference, from the rejection of Rome to the rejection of continental culture. Traditionally, Britain chose distinct ways and means from our friends across the Channel. From its coinage to the profile of its cities, its publications to the approach on sex, marriage and gender roles. An independent path that assumed individual conscience, appealing to a higher authority than the national crown. Britain elected to be different. On his love for Britain, Jordan Peterson emphatically remarked that the people of this nation, and I quote, granted the world a gift whose power stands in permanent opposition to our most appalling proclivities as individuals and societies. Freedom in speech, imagination and thought. Freedom to engage in the very process that builds and rebuilds habitable order. He says that freedom is expressed in many ways, small and great, in the British Isles, in the wit of its people, in the effectiveness of its institutions, in the beauty of its art and literature, in the political and psychological presumptions that guide private discourse and public conception and action. In truth, gifted from above, Britain has been a bastion, a stronghold, a guardian of freedom. It is a land of peace, not unfamiliar with terrorism, political, nationalistic and religious, and still a battle has not been fought on Welsh or English soil since Sedgemoor 1685, Scotland just 6 decades later. British are eccentric, quirky and polite, will happily form a queue for fish and chips, English breakfast, Welsh cake, haggis, Chelsea bun, Cumberland sausage, Yorkshire pudding, Cornish pasty, Scottish whisky, Ulster fry, a cup of tea or a pint in the local pub, the second home. A kingdom in which you can travel an hour in any direction and hear an entirely different accent, if not language. Britain's production is iconic tales, literature and biblical translation. It's an iconic film setting with its iconic red buses, red phone box and post box, iconic black cabs and personified clock tower. There was a time when its people deemed British engineering, inventions and manufacture as unrivaled. British forces, British institutions, British sports were best. British formal education, its universities in timeless, picturesque surroundings, once admired from pole to pole. From fierce barbarians of enchanted, evasive isles to one of the most esteemed, lionised, yet civilised nations on earth. Once exceptionally free, scrupulously governed, extraordinarily just, charitable, educated and cultured, typically upright in its relations. We are, as self-confessed pessimist Peter Hitchens puts, inherently conservative yet tolerant, capitalist yet blessed with a social conscience. We have military skills, but we do not use them to oppress our neighbours. Our chiefly Judeo-Christian foundations, comparatively and on man's balances, produced a society that has been a blessing to the world more than a cursing. One of the most favoured, fairest, compassionate, kindest civilizations to have ever existed in this fallen world. Make no mistake, it was the Jewish Jesus, the Christ in Christianity, it was the living Word of God, it was the Christian roots that made it great and made it rain blessings that were freely received to freely give.